What I wanted was to fall asleep, close my eyes and disappear like a petal on a stream, a feather on the air. Lily white and poppy red, I trembled when he laid me out. You won't feel a thing, he said, when you go down. Nothing gonna wake you up now. Dreams are sweet.
Hello, everyone. My name is Julie Thompson. I work for the Waterloo Region Crime Prevention Council. We are so happy to have you here. Welcome to our Honeybee event, and thank you all for coming. Today, we are hosting this event on the traditional territories of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Neutral peoples. It is also known as Waterloo Region in Ontario, Canada. We are situated on the Haldimand Track, where 6 miles either side of the Grand River has traditionally been Six Nations land. Today, less than 5% remains Six Nations land. It is important that we acknowledge the land where we live, work, play, and learn, and understand who it belongs to. We have many people joining us from places other than Waterloo Region, and we invite you to acknowledge the First Peoples on the land where you are now in the chat. This is particularly important in the context of sexual violence and human trafficking. We recognize that human trafficking disproportionately affects Indigenous communities. We know that there are thousands of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, and as a country, we have reacted in relative silence. We must look at the intersections of racism, colonialism, and sexual violence. Those of us who are settlers must do more to work against the structures and the systems which allow this violence to continue. Honeybee is one of 8 events, all part of our Chelsea series this week, designed to raise awareness about human sex trafficking in our community. This virtual series is brought to you by the Waterloo Region Crime Prevention Council, Empty Space Theatre Company, and the Sexual Assault Support Centre of Waterloo Region, also known as SASC. The series started this past Monday, which was the first Human Trafficking Awareness Day in Canada. It continues throughout the week with a multitude of events. We are ecstatic by the response to this event. We have had over 160 people register from all over North America and some outside of North America. So without further ado, I'm happy to introduce the film Honeybee. It is an award-winning Canadian film that shines a light on young girls that are lured into and trying to escape from human trafficking rings in Northern Ontario.
Lily white and poppy red, I trembled when he laid me out. You won't feel a thing, he said, when you go down.
Welcome back, everyone, for the second part of our event. Thanks to those of you who added the reflections to the chat. I want to welcome our panelists. We have with us today 3 guests with very diverse experiences with human trafficking. We have Michelle Furgiuele. Michelle is a Canadian human trafficking survivor, speaker, consultant, and social advocate. With 15 years experience in multiple facets of the sex trade, Michelle now uses her story and extensive knowledge to educate and train various sectors on the realities of human trafficking. For her work, Michelle has been presenting preventative practices in high schools, to police agencies, service providers, and the hotel, hospitality, and travel sectors. Michelle has co-written several manuals on how to detect human trafficking, along with assisting victims in crisis and providing ongoing mentorship. Sally Karam is an award-winning film and TV producer born and raised in Cochrane, Ontario. Her latest film, Honey Bee, has won many awards, including Best Feature Film presented by the Alliance of Women Female Journalists and a Leo Award for Best Performance by a Lead Actor, Julia Sarah Stone. Sally's other award-winning films are What We Have, Show and Tell, and Perfect and Kubo's Crickets, all tackling social issues in Canada and have played festivals around the world. When Sally isn't making films, she produces the hit comedy series Baron Von Sketch Show for CBC. And we have Melissa Hern, who is a services worker for the Victim Witness Assistance Program of Kitchener and Guelph. She earned her master's degree from the University of Guelph in criminology and criminal justice policy. Since 2013, Melissa has worked with the Victim Witness Assistance Program as caseworker and the Child Witness Center in Kitchener. Melissa developed a strong interest in working with survivors of human trafficking as local cases began to increase significantly. She finds the work both challenging and rewarding and is very interested to see how the criminal justice system responds and evolves to this increase. Melissa has been married for 7 years and is the proud mother of a very busy 2-year-old boy. Thank you all. We are so happy to have you here today. Thank you for coming and sharing your thoughts and experiences. Melissa, the first question we have is for you. One of the constant barriers to addressing human trafficking is that people don't fully understand what it is or believe that it happens here. From your experience, can you talk about what you see in your work?
Absolutely. I'll start by saying that human trafficking is very much about control and exploitation, and it is absolutely happening in our region. No one can consent to being exploited, and being exploited can involve threats or coercion, deception, or the abuse of a position of trust or authority. Trafficking in our region has significantly increased over the last few years. In our region, victims are primarily young females, currently on my caseload as young as 14 and into young adulthood. It's most often taking place in hotels, motels, Airbnbs, quite popular recently, and private residences. There's definitely travel that's taking place between Kitchener, London, Toronto, and even out of the province and into Quebec, we're seeing. We are seeing human trafficking connected to gun violence and to gang affiliations. And some of the human trafficking we're seeing is very organized. Traffickers are using drugs and alcohol to control victims. As a result, those victims are often developing drug dependencies or are often told that because they're being provided drugs, they now have debts to pay. Traffickers are often controlling victims' phones, access to social media, their personal identification. We are certainly seeing, as you saw in the film, top girls that are involved in the recruitment of other young females. So there are a lot of women who are both being victimized but are also participating in the recruitment. We're often seeing that boyfriend style or the Romeo style traffickers. And I can say that we're also seeing victims from all backgrounds. So those from secure and stable families, but also those who may lack that support and be more vulnerable. So really anyone can fall victim to human trafficking. When it comes to offenders, we're definitely seeing repeat traffickers. So that tells us that trafficking is very lucrative and that there is a significantly high demand given that these offenders don't seem to be deterred enough by criminal consequences. Typically, as you got a hint of in the video, victims are often reporting their victimization or come forward because of fear for other young females who may be brought into the game or out of fear for the safety of their own family and friends who traffickers have often threatened to harm as a way of controlling victims. So that's kind of a brief snippet of what we've seen in our region that's taking place.
Okay, Melissa, thank you very much. Michelle, our next question is for you. As a survivor yourself and as a mentor to others, how does this film line up with your experience?
Absolutely. So in my personal experience, just to give everyone a little bit background on what I went through. So I was trafficked at the age of 15 from Oakville, Ontario. I was actually living in my family home and attending high school during the duration of my victimization. I come from an upper middle class family. I'm the eldest of 4. I did not want or need for anything, but like Melissa mentioned, vulnerability and insecurities is all it takes to get trafficked. And that's really what we saw in this film. I can relate so much to Honeybee's character in that desperation to belong. Even in some of those first scenes when we saw them drinking and smoking and listening to music and dancing outside at a picnic bench, these are all, if you take that out, that they're in a parking lot of a motel, you put that at a high school, those are normal childlike behaviors. These are things that these traffickers are providing these victims. And like myself, I was so insecure. I was desperate to fit in. And that's how I really relate to this film and how this film really hits the nail on the head as depicting the true emotions that a victim goes through while they're being trafficked.
Thank you, Michelle. Sally, can you tell us how you came to produce this film and its impact on you personally?
For sure. First of all, I have to say hi to Michelle because thank you so much for doing this. I mean, it takes such courage and bravery to speak up. And also, Melissa, to the work that you do. And for Julie and the team, I mean, doing a week now in this pandemic when everyone's so isolated and so alone, it's so important. And it just speaks to my experience because we tried to make this film. I optioned this script from the writer Bonnie Fairweather in 2008, if you can imagine. And she wrote it in 2008 and I got the script in 2010 and I worked for 8 years to try and get it financed. And I could not get anyone to invest in it because no one knew about trafficking at all at that point, and no one was interested in funding that kind of story. So it was very, very difficult and very frustrating. And a couple things changed. And I think in about 2017, when Ontario Press really shined a light on the issue in the summertime and kind of cracked open a little bit of awareness, then we were able to sort of jump on that. My producing partner, Damon de Oliveira, was integral in that too. And we sort of pushed the financiers to take a look. And even then they didn't want to finance a movie. They thought it was too marginal. And I think it speaks to what Melissa said, is that people just didn't believe that this was happening. So it was really difficult. And then I think there was just a shift with that kind of awareness. And then people were more interested in Ontario and in Canada about funding female-led projects and stories. And the other thing that happened is this story takes place in Northern Ontario for a couple of reasons. Because I'm from the North, as I mentioned, I'm from Cochrane, and there was a fund that was available that was going to support stories from the North. So all of a sudden, everything came together, and we were able to make the movie in 2018. And a funny story about Julia Sarah Stone, who plays the lead, she plays Natalie, is that she auditioned, she's from Vancouver, and she auditioned for the role in my first round of trying to get it financed in 2010, when she was a tiny little young person. And then again in my second round of trying to get it financed around 2015. And then when I tried again in 2018, she still looked young enough, and actually she'd matured enough really to take on the role. And she came back and she auditioned every time and she got the role every time. So it was kind of meant to be.
Wonderful, wonderful. Michelle, can you help us understand from the vantage point of someone who's being trafficked, one, how someone could not know that they're being trafficked, and two, why they don't leave when they have a chance?
Absolutely. So I'm actually going to just share some points that Melissa and Sally just shared. People didn't know what human trafficking was. I'm going to share from my experience. My parents found out that something was happening with me when I hit the age of 18. And I did eventually confess to my parents, and they brought me to the police. When we arrived at the police, they simply told us, you know what? Change your phone numbers, use the buddy system. And they almost told my parents, I mean, your daughter's just a spoiled brat doing what she wants to do and, you know, teenage rebellious. And we were sent home. And about 3 months later, I was physically attacked and stabbed on my walking to work as a direct result of going to the police. If society doesn't know what human trafficking is, how is a victim to know what human trafficking is? And that's why this education is so, so key, and it's so important. And I think every single person that's attended tonight and everyone that's been involved in putting this together, because this is what I'm so passionate about, is preventative measures. Myself, I did not know I was being trafficked throughout my I had never heard of human trafficking. I had never even seen the movie Taken. I still haven't seen that movie. And that's the typical thing that everyone says. So I didn't know. Prostitution to me was Julia Roberts, Pretty Woman, or downtown Toronto off Jarvis, the Streetwalkers. I didn't even living through it. I did not even equate that I was a prostitute. I didn't know where the men were coming from. I did not post my own ads. It was completely above my head. And I was a naive 15-year-old girl that really didn't know anything together. Now, I can also speak on, I got away from my first traffickers and re-entered the sex trade and was re-victimized by another trafficker. And that trafficker was a Romeo pimp. And it was extremely hard for me to leave, even though I was fully able to identify that I am being trafficked. This guy is exploiting me. This is where I'm turning into. It's hard to give up the only life you know. It's hard to go back to that vulnerable girl that was 15 years old, because I'd been entrapped in this life. I hadn't dealt with any of my insecurities. So going right back, I would be vulnerable without him. I wouldn't have a place to live. I wouldn't have transportation. I wouldn't have food. I'm giving up everything in that moment. And more so than physical needs, it was that emotional need that I just desperately needed. And honestly, you can give the excuse of pass him off. It's just, I have a bad boyfriend situation, or it will get better. Or I've been through this before. I know how to handle myself, which is why it is so key for education. And I am so glad that we've all come together tonight to shed light on this issue.
I think it's just so hard to believe for people that this happens so commonly. And, you know, for many of the girls, especially with Romeo pimps, they really feel like they're in love and that this person loves them. And breaking away from that is so difficult. And you can certainly see that with Honeybee as well. Melissa, the next question is for you. Working with children and youth in the court system and preparing them to testify, what are some of the long-term impacts that you see them struggling with?
Yeah, the long-term impacts are immense when it comes to human trafficking. The survivors that I've worked with, they're dealing with a tremendous amount of trauma. And the idea of testifying means asking them to relive all of the details of that trauma. It's an unbelievable thing that we're asking of them. Investigation and prosecution of these offenses is often incredibly involved, and the court process can take years. Those survivors need strong supports and most often professional support to start the healing process. Rightfully so, they often have difficulty trusting others. They often resist support because, again, they may not even usually by the time they've spoken to police, they have some understanding that what's happened to them is wrong. But again, they may not still have that full awareness, so they often resist support. They often experience strained relationships with those that are close to them. They have difficulty rebuilding those relationships. Again, they may have drug or alcohol addictions that they're battling. So they may have developed those addictions as a result of being provided drugs or alcohol while trafficking, but now they may be using that as a means to cope with the trauma as well. They can experience anxiety, depression, thoughts of suicide. They may be really dependent on others or have difficulty with decision making because they've lacked that control over their own lives for so long. It's also, as Michelle mentioned, it's really difficult for survivors to stay out of the game or the culture of human trafficking, and they're very often dragged back into that lifestyle. Because the court process is so long, it can also be difficult for survivors to stay engaged, and their feelings about continuing with the prosecution change a lot over the course of the prosecution. So, and Michelle also mentioned that a lot of that she had been assaulted as a result of speaking with the police, and many of our survivors do experience threats from traffickers or their associates that create fear about continuing to be involved with the prosecution. They're often angry at the criminal justice system and its participants because of delays, re-victimization, all of the rights an offender has when they're before the court. And because these prosecutions are so difficult, and holding offenders accountable can be so difficult, that's often very discouraging to them as well. But I can say for certain that all of the survivors that I've worked with have been incredibly resilient, are incredibly inspiring, but we know that the healing process can have a lot of setbacks along the way. So.
Awesome. Michelle, did you want to add anything to that?
Sorry, I just froze for a second, guys. No, I think Melissa really hit the nail on the head there. Like, that really sums up everything. That was beautifully said. Beautifully said.
Okay, wonderful. So I'm going to go to the chat. We've got some live questions here. And one of them is, and I'm not sure if we've got somebody who has a lot of knowledge about this area, but the question is for people who, for the people who that foster survivors, do they receive special training? Does anybody want to answer that question? I have a little bit of an answer, I think. So there are homes, and again, Melissa, you might know about it. There are recovery homes that are built that are specific for people coming out of being trafficked, and those homes are wraparound. There's a huge amount of support that is offered for every aspect of somebody who's in those homes. I also know that SASC, they have an anti-human trafficking program that works with survivors, and they also have programming that also works for family members. And they work with survivors as long as those survivors want the support. And it is a real gradual building process. And the support is definitely a wraparound support. I can't speak to, somebody might have this answer, I can't speak to what happens in Family and Children's Services in terms of the foster system. I do know that I think the awareness about trafficking has gone way up over the last few years, and I know that there are people from Family and Children's Services who are attending some of the events that we have over the course of this week. So I know that definitely it's on their radar, but I'm not sure specifically what kind of training that they have for fostering survivors. Does anybody want to add anything?
I have been privileged to be a part of a lot of training sessions through sharing my own story. I will say, even from my own personal experiences, when I was 15 years old, I'm 30 now, so that's 15 years ago, the amount of awareness and training that's out there is substantial. I actually just started at Restorations Canada Second Stage Homes. It is going to be open in the Burlington area, and it is transitional homes. So it's not a typical safe home, which you see a lot of, but it's for up to 2 years for people, former victims, to turn into survivors and reintegrate into society. But through our own organization, this morning we took a human trafficking seminar hosted by the Halton Coalition Against Human Trafficking. We have trainings on a monthly, if not bi-monthly basis. We are always looking to educate ourselves because the dynamic of human trafficking is always changing. The pimps are always, and traffickers seem to be always 1 or 2 steps ahead of us. So continuing on education is so key because everything is always evolving.
I think it's important to note as well, since the pandemic has hit, it has increased a lot of issues with trafficking and specifically online sexual exploitation. SASC is saying that in just the first 3 months of the pandemic, they had a 27% increase in people seeking services for online sexual exploitation. And technology absolutely plays a huge role in access to people in where we think they're safe, in their own homes, in their own bedrooms, and also in terms of the actual purchasing of services. So we have another live question. It was mentioned in Monday's panel about the void in safe space and residential supports for 12 to 15-year-old people caught up in trafficking situations. Could you speak to any known work being done in Ontario pertaining to this particular age group? I think, Michelle, that's what you were talking about with restoration homes. Does anybody have anything to add to that? Michelle, if you wanted to.
I know it is very difficult. And that the younger age group is always a super difficult jurisdiction to handle, especially if Children's Aid Society is involved. However, I personally know of one resource in the Halton area. Elizabeth Fry actually has 2 safe homes that they're running, and they do allow, I think they actually accept people at the age of 13 or 14. I'm not positive which one, but they definitely do that younger age group. But it really is hard to find beds for people under the age of 16 currently.
Melissa, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, I would just agree. There's definitely a gap in services. A lot of services are 16 plus, and we run into that problem too when we're trying to make referrals. Some places will make exceptions, depending on information you can provide, but there certainly is a gap in service. So I think the more awareness we create, the more likely we can ensure that that age group is supported. They're really in need of the most support.
I mean, what we've heard about trafficking is the average age is 12 to 15 where kids are recruited in. And so for that to be the largest age group for recruitment and to not have places that provide services to that age group, that's a huge gap for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So sorry about this. I'm strolling through, getting used to technology here. Another live question with regards to the language terminology. Should service providers be using the word survivor or victim? Who would like to answer that question?
Ooh, I think this is a sensitive topic matter. Personally, I can speak for myself personally, and just from mentoring other survivors of human trafficking, I can maybe, I can't speak for them, but maybe share some of their opinions with you. For myself personally, of course, I would never want to be considered a victim. And I think that is the status quo across the board. Nobody wants to be consider this, oh, poor me, I'm such a victim. Like, that's not liberating at all. That doesn't do anything along the healing process. For myself, I appreciate people calling me a survivor of human trafficking. Do I feel myself like I'm a survivor? Not really. I'm still living my life. I'm just so grateful to be Michelle again. I love when people just identify me as Michelle and see me as Michelle and what I'm contributing currently in my life, and ask me something about like, hey, what are you doing for work now? How's your day going? Other than focusing on my past experience as I'm trying to move on from my past experience. So I definitely would say that overall, definitely using the term survivor, I love the terminology lived experience. I have lived experience that I can bring forward in lots of aspects of my life, and that brings me a little bit more self-awareness and confidence through referring to someone with lived experience.
Awesome. Thank you. Melissa, did you want to add anything to that?
I think I try very often to use survivor. Sometimes when we're in the criminal justice system, we get caught up in victim. So I think I try to be very conscious of using the term survivor. That's truly what they are, especially by the time they begin working with us. So I do agree. My experience is that certainly people that have experienced and gone through trafficking would much rather be labeled a survivor, if anything, compared to a victim.
Awesome. One more question. I'm interested in hearing about how much success there is in prosecuting the people who are committing human trafficking crimes. What are their sentences like? Are the sentences sufficient in the opinion of the panelists? Are current efforts to address human trafficking from the legal perspective sufficient? Melissa, I'm going to give that one to you at first.
Sure. I think the prosecutions are, at least in our region, are fairly new. We certainly have had some that have from start to finish. I have one in particular that was very involved and is close to wrapping up in its entirety. I think initially there were 6 individuals charged, and we are soon to have the last individual sentenced. Because these prosecutions are so difficult and they're so complex, I would say that there's a lot of challenges and the law has a long way to go in dealing with those challenges more successfully. I don't particularly, and I may be biased because I'm working with those survivors and I form some sort of relationship and understanding with them, so I often don't feel that the sentences are sufficient. I don't know that you can ever be sentenced and it will provide any closure to that survivor or any satisfaction. But I think we have a long way to go, and unfortunately, because of the complexity of the prosecutions, often people plead to only certain charges or are only found guilty of certain charges. It's very difficult to get a successful prosecution on the human trafficking charge. Often they end up sentenced on other charges, not necessarily the human trafficking, which would carry the more significant sentence.
The other point is, if we're waiting for the legal system to deal with this, there's already been a lot of victims, and it seems that we could learn something to try to figure out how to go higher up and to address the demand for services that create this lucrative business. Mm-hmm. So there is a question in that vein that I think would be great to ask you to answer, Michelle. Hello, everyone. Wonderful job with this series. Wondering if someone could speak to what is going through the minds of those who are taking advantage of those who are being trafficked, i.e., those who are being serviced, why they are choosing to participate in the trafficking system, trying to understand where the cycle begins and ends, and how there can be more pressure on exposing offenders versus survivors.
So it's a hard subject to broach. I would hate to say it, but this is the reality of what's really happening. The people that are purchasing sexual services from victims of human trafficking are your husbands, your brothers, your friend at work, they're your next door neighbor, they're every one of us. I actually work in a restaurant, and I'm the general manager at a restaurant, and I one day went on to our back of our line in our kitchen, and all the people that work here are either teenagers or in their young 20s. And if you ask any one of them what the average hourly rate of an escort in our area, 9 out of 10 of them could have answered that question. This is common knowledge. This is just something they do on their way home from work, on their lunch break. For myself, it was shocking. My busiest periods of when I was an escort were at lunchtime and the after work rush. Those are the people that are servicing it. Now, again, this goes back to education. A lot of these Johns simply do not know they're seeing someone that's trafficked, and they don't necessarily know that this person might be underage. When I was 15, they advertised me older. Typically, when police do checkups at hotels especially, they typically go for the younger girls. So my trafficker would be like, every girl that came in, you're 20 years old. We actually don't want to put 18, because now this is going to alert the police to come in and check things out, and we don't want that. So you're 20 years old. It's a misconception even amongst people that are aware of human trafficking, of what Johns truly look like. They're unaware that they're of the amount of damage they're causing. And I'm not trying to stand up for them. I'm not condoning their actions by any means, but I've had amazing conversations with some of the Johns that I've serviced about my situation. And I've heard apologies. Since my exit, I've had articles run in papers, and I've had some of them email me and been like, I am so sorry that I contributed to your victimization. What can I do for you? What are my next steps? I feel like I'm an awful person. And I just said to 3 of those individuals that messaged me, please just educate yourself and do better in the future. I don't hold anything against you. But it is ridiculously common how many men are talking about which escorts they went and saw at their lunch break when they get back to work. There's review boards out there where men actually rate and review the service of these victims out there. So it's a crazy world out there, and these Johns really do need to be educated in order to get them to stop participating and purchasing the sexual services.
Thank you, Michelle. We've got one more question. I think that'll be our last question. I just so appreciate everybody, because I know most of us are on Zoom all day, and here it is after 9:30 at night and we're still on Zoom. So thank you so much, everybody who has hung in. And we've got the next question is, what is the difference? And I think this is an important distinction to make. What is the difference between sex work and sex trafficking? Melissa, can I give that one to you?
Sure. Sex work is certainly someone who is choosing to participate in the sex trade. They're not being controlled or exploited by a particular individual. Someone is not taking the money that they earn from them. They have control over the work that they are doing. So they are presumably booking their own jobs, posting their own ads, getting their own clients, arranging whether or not they're doing in calls, out calls. They are really controlling the work that they are doing to the extent that they can, but they have control over the jobs that they take. They have control of the money that they earn. There's no one that is booking their jobs. There's no one who's dictating the services they'll provide. They are choosing to participate, whereas sex trafficking, there is that level of control and exertion and exploitation, where someone is usually posting the ads indicating which services an individual will provide, sometimes mostly without any consent. Sorry, lost my train of thought there for a second. They're often controlling the money. They're often booking all the jobs. The victim doesn't have any communication with the clients that are booking those services. And they don't usually have access to any of the funds that are being received for those services.
Okay. I think consent, there's also an age level for consent as well, right?
Yes, absolutely.
People are 18. Have to be at least 18 to be able to consent.
Right, absolutely.
So we've had a couple of things happening in the chat here. I'm having a hard time differentiating between reading and listening to everybody's questions. So we've got Jessica St. Peters is in our audience, and she's from SASC, and she says that SASC responds to requests from training for foster parents and similar services, and that those are offered, available at the local anti-human sex trafficking programs. So please keep an eye on the SASC website for Human Trafficking 101 training. And I think we've got 2 workshops that are going to be offered as part of this series. One is responding to disclosure, and another is what is men's role in trafficking. I think it's really important to say that SASC is always running lots of different workshops. They've got lots of different opportunities that are available for the community to improve their understanding of this issue. And so anybody wanting training, and if there's something that's not on the website, I'm sure you can contact SASC and they can help connect you with somebody who is able to provide that training. All right, that's the second one. And then I've also been told here that We will continue to answer questions after the webinar, so people can stay on if they have more questions. We'll continue to answer those as best as we can, or to find answers for you. Yes, that you can choose to stay and leave questions and answers. And I'm also supposed to remind you of the rest of the Chelsea story. I already have that in my notes, so I'm going to do that. I just really want to say thank you so much. The film is emotional and gripping and powerful, and a lot of it is very difficult to watch. But it's a very important film, and to have all of you guys come and share your experiences and your point of view is just so helpful to try to orient ourselves within our own communities and within our own social circles and our own basic understanding around what exactly is trafficking, how does it happen in our community, and what can we start to do to prevent it. And again, waiting for it to get to the justice system means that victims have been created, so we want to keep pushing upstream to try and figure out how do we prevent it in the first place. So really, really want to say thank you to Michelle and Melissa and Sally. It's been a very long day for you guys. Thank you so much for coming and sharing your experience. I want to also thank Abby and Amy, who are behind the scenes people. If I had something in my ear, they'd be the ones that are talking in my ear, but that would just be something else to distract me. Can you guys turn on your cameras so everybody can see who you are? Thank you very much. You guys are awesome. I want to thank the audience. Again, a very long program tonight, and just really great that so many of you hung in with us. So thank you very much. We really want to hear your thoughts on this event. So you will receive, I've got in my notes, you should receive, because we're not entirely sure, but we hope that you will receive a survey to complete upon the completion of this webinar. Please take your time to just let us know what your thoughts are. And remember to check out Chelsea's series at preventingcrime.ca for other events that are happening, and to find out more about the partners that we are doing these events with. So with that, I want to say good night to everybody. Thank you for joining us.
Is anybody listening? I open my mouth and nothing comes out. Nothing gonna wake me now. Flowers, I remember fields of flowers, soft beneath my heels, walking in the sun. I remember someone by my side, turned their face to mine, and then I turned away. In